Just because his girlfriend scolded him that he deserved to be single for life, he hacked into the computers of all the girls in Harvard and downloaded their private photos. He made a website for Harvard boys to rate the girls, but he didn't expect that the website would be online for just 2 hours at 2 a.m. The huge traffic paralyzed the school's server, so that the management had to get up in the middle of the night to work overtime. The next day, he not only became the public enemy of all the girls in the school, but was also punished by the school and stayed in school for half a year. Unexpectedly, this incident turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Not long after, he not only founded the world's largest social platform, he also grew into a business empire with a market value of over 100 billion yuan in the future. And he became the youngest billionaire in the world because of this. He is Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook. This movie will show you how a genius who fights loneliness with wisdom and a young man who is lost in the tearing of emotions and ambitions built the world's #1 social website from scratch. Why did he turn against his former good friend? The whole story started from Mark's chat with his girlfriend in the bar that night. For Mark, who is smart but has low emotional intelligence, he seems to have difficulty understanding the true meaning of small talk. He always seizes on the slight loopholes in his girlfriend's words, and then falls into meaningless arguments and changes the topic at will. In just 5 minutes of conversation, he switched 4 different topics, from the number of geniuses in China is more than the population of the United States, to which club should he join, and finally, he lightly mocked his girlfriend for studying in a so-called inferior university. The girlfriend was so angry that she cursed, "Maybe you will have a certain achievement in the IT industry in the future. But people like you deserve to be single for life." Then his girlfriend got up and left angrily. Mark, who was dumped, hurried back to the dormitory. He came to the computer and began to write a blog to mock his girlfriend, maliciously attacking her appearance, including derogatory comments on her body characteristics. After publishing, he still felt unsatisfied. At this time, he heard his roommate's idea to put the apartment album together with poultry. Let them compare their charms. This prank inspired Mark. Mark thought that it would be more meaningful to compare people with each other instead of comparing people with animals, and the ultimate goal was to highlight the charm of women. So Mark hacked into every girl's apartment and downloaded the girls' photos. In just 4 hours, he already had the beautiful photos of most girls in the school. Then Mark made a website to compare the two sides, and Harvard boys chose the sexiest one in their hearts. At this time, Mark urgently needed a set of algorithm formulas. It happened that his good friend Eduardo, a mathematical genius majoring in economics, learned about his breakup through a blog and took the initiative to come to comfort him. Mark just needed the mathematical formula that Eduardo used when he was speculating in oil not long ago. This formula can dynamically evaluate the charm of girls based on the scores of visitors. Soon, Mark wrote the formula into a website called Appearance Rating. After sending it to a few friends via email, this simple web page created temporarily began to spread exponentially among Harvard students. Students commented on the photos of female classmates, and the page received more than 22,000 hits in less than 2 hours. Harvard's internal server was squeezed to the point of collapse, forcing the administrator to get up in the middle of the night to repair it. Soon, Mark's actions were published in the school newspaper, and he was called to the school management committee for review. In the end, he was sentenced to 6 months of probation for crimes such as invasion of privacy. The website was also ordered to be shut down by the management committee. Although Mark felt that it was wrong to leak the photos of female classmates privately, he did not admit that he had damaged public safety. Instead, he felt that he should be rewarded for finding a loophole in the school. However, no matter how hard-mouthed and smart he undoubtedly became the public enemy of all the girls in the school. Even during class, he would receive notes scolding him. However, just when he thought his life had hit rock bottom, 2 twin men with a height of 1.98 meters found him. At first, Mark thought they were here to speak up for their female classmates, but they were impressed by his ability and wanted to recruit him. It turned out that the twins were planning a social networking site exclusively for Harvard students. Harvard students can put their information and photos on it based on their years of experience in partying. They thought that all girls wanted to date Harvard students, so they predicted that this website would be a great success. But they were currently lacking an outstanding programmer. So after seeing Mark's story, the twins took the initiative to find Mark and invite him to work together. Faced with the sudden recruitment, Mark agreed without hesitation. But he didn't really want to join at all, and doing so was just a delaying tactic. Because inspired by the twins, he had a better idea. But before the idea became a reality, he couldn't let the twins' website go online first. and he couldn't tell them his idea. So Mark turned to his friend Eduardo and said, "We can build a social platform for users to edit and upload their own information. This can avoid the problem of privacy infringement. If Eduardo is willing to pay $1,000 as startup capital, we will split the future income 70% to 30%. Eduardo thought this was a promising project. He immediately expressed his willingness to join. After getting the first investment in the project, Mark began to write code day and night. During this period, the twins asked to meet him several times, but he gave various excuses. In just 42 days, the website was built and the domain name on Facebook was officially registered. At the same time, Mark informed the twins through text messages that since their project lacked sufficient appeal, it was recommended to terminate the project. Later, inspired by an emotionally rich classmate, Mark added an emotional status display function to the user interface of the application. And this seemingly insignificant little function will bring earth-shaking changes to the Facebook. After everything was ready, the Facebook was officially launched. In order to obtain the first batch of seed users, Mark used Eduardo's connections in the Phoenix Society to send links to all the rich kids at Harvard. After that, the Facebook spread rapidly like a virus, and more than 600 people registered in less than 2 days. However, the existence of the Facebook was soon discovered by the twins, who were born in a famous family and had won since childhood. This was the first time they were fooled so thoroughly, but even if they were so angry that they were smoking, Cameron, the elder brother, still didn't want to solve it by fighting, because in his opinion, it was not decent, and it was not something a Harvard gentleman should do. So he just asked his father's lawyer to send a lawyer's letter to Mark. Although Mark felt that this was not a threat, after all, he didn't use any code from the other party. Regarding the definition of creativity, the boundary between plagiarism and plagiarism is often difficult to clarify. However, when Eduardo learned about this, he was furious. Not only because he was afraid of being sued, but also because Mark had never mentioned this to him before. As the co-founder of the Facebook, Eduardo expressed his willingness to stand by Mark, but the premise is that they must trust each other and not hide anything. Mark promised that this would never happen again, and the Facebook continued to be popular in the school for the next 2 weeks. Even "add me to Facebook" became a popular phrase in Harvard. Since the founders' names were written at the bottom of the website, Mark and Eduardo instantly became the celebrities on campus. Girls who had previously refused to pay attention to them also flirted with them. However, just when Mark was in high spirits, his ex-girlfriend poured a bucket of cold water on him in public. That day, he and Eduardo had just spent a night in the bathroom with an admirer, and when they came out, they saw his ex-girlfriend who had dumped him. Originally, he wanted to show off in front of his ex, but he didn't expect that the other party had never heard of the Facebook. This frustrated Mark's self-esteem again, and made him realize that his feat should not be limited to Harvard. So he immediately decided to expand the team, with Eduardo as the financial director and 30% of the original shares, and his roommate Dustin as the vice president of technology and 5% of the shares. At the same time, he also recruited intern programmers to write code, vowing to conquer Boston University, where his ex-girlfriend was in a short period of time, as well as Yale University and Columbia University next door, and Eduardo also proposed Stanford University. After all, Harvard and Stanford have always had a close relationship. Little did he know that Eduardo, who was soaked like a drowned chicken on a rainy night in California 2 years later, would regret today's proposal, because he will meet his lifelong enemy Sean in San Francisco, where Stanford is located. Sean is a lustful playboy, but he is also a well-known young genius in the industry. He developed the free music download software Napster at the age of 19, although he later lost the lawsuit in court due to copyright issues. But he saw the general trend of digital concerts killing physical records. However, the compensation for the lawsuit also made him bankrupt, which made him urgently need a promising investment project to enrich his pockets. Just at this time, he woke up in the bed of a Stanford female student and saw the Facebook page opened on the computer next to him. And he saw the huge commercial potential behind it at a glance. Later, the Facebook did become a world-famous social software under his operation. But before that, the Facebook got into trouble again, because Mark's expansion plan soon spread to the twins. The younger brother suggested that a lawyer apply for an injunction to shut down the Facebook, because the longer the website is online, the less valuable their Harvard friendship will be. But the older brother still thinks this behavior is rude. At this time, the younger brother suddenly remembered the Harvard Student Handbook, which clearly stated that you cannot steal other students' things. This made them seem to see the dawn, and they immediately decided to complain to the president. So the next day, They got the opportunity to meet the president through their father's relationship. However, facing the brothers' lengthy accusations, the president said that their ideas were not realized, so it was just an idea. Harvard's per capita creative people. Instead of entangled in stealing ideas, it is better to start a new project from scratch. When the twins said angrily that our idea was worth millions of dollars, the principal couldn't help laughing. Because as the former U.S. Treasury Secretary, he didn't believe that a student's idea could be so valuable. Of course, he probably didn't dare to imagine that Facebook's market value could reach tens of trillions in the future, and the twins' complaint ended in failure. At this time, the Facebook had covered 29 universities and had nearly 80,000 highly sticky members. With these chips, Eduardo, as the financial director, began to think about how to make a profit, and the way he could think of was pop-up ads. But Mark was very resistant to this approach. Because he felt that the website was in a period of rapid development, no one knew what it would eventually become. If pop-up ads were suddenly introduced at this time, it would probably change it beyond recognition. However, at Eduardo's strong request, Mark agreed to meet with the New York advertiser. However, during the negotiation, he deliberately made trouble and finally ruined the deal as he wished. After that, they arranged several more meetings, but none of them aroused Mark's interest. Until Eduardo's girlfriend introduced him to Sean, who was interested in Facebook. In fact, Mark admired this senior who had achieved great success in starting a business at a young age before they met, and his liking for him doubled after they met. Because he was confident, outspoken, humorous, it was obviously a communication dinner for four people, but it quickly became his personal show. The most important thing is that Sean's idea about the Facebook is exactly the same as Mark's. They both think it is not appropriate to introduce advertising at this time. For example, it is like you are waiting in line to play, but suddenly you are told that it will end at 11 o'clock. In addition, Sean also painted a big pie for Mark, saying that the future commercial value of the Facebook will definitely not be less than $1 billion. However, what finally conquered Mark was Sean's last sentence before leaving. It would be more concise to remove the from the Facebook, which is indeed an epic change. But it was this dinner that laid the groundwork for Mark and Eduardo to part ways. Because Eduardo has always disliked Sean not only because of his chaotic private life, but also because he used dishonorable means to cause the bankruptcy of two internet companies. So Eduardo was worried that he would be detrimental to the development of Facebook. Of course, there was also a selfish reason. He was afraid that Sean's appearance would weaken his voice. However, Mark obviously supported Sean's statement, so the differences between him and Eduardo became more intense. A few months later, Facebook's user base exceeded 15 universities, and Eduardo wanted to continue to look for monetization opportunities in New York. Mark was persuaded by Sean and decided to move his base to California during the summer vacation. Since neither of them could convince the other, they decided to act separately. But before parting, Eduardo generously gave Mark $18,000 for all his expenses in California for the sake of the company. At first, Eduardo thought that nothing big would happen in the short 3 months of summer vacation, but he didn't expect that he and Mark would be farther and farther apart during this period. In California, Mark rented a villa with a swimming pool. In addition to writing code, a group of people usually entertain themselves in the yard. On this day, they played Too Crazy and destroyed a chimney, and the sound attracted the neighbor next door to knock on the door. Unexpectedly, the other party turned out to be Sean, and as usual, he brought a beautiful girl. Sean was very happy to know that Mark moved to California to work. When he learned that Eduardo didn't come with him, he showed a meaningful smile on his face. At night, Sean took Mark to the nightclub to show his hospitality. But the purpose was not to have fun, but to take the opportunity to alienate the relationship between Mark and Eduardo. Because Sean wanted to join Facebook very much, but his functions were highly overlapped with Eduardo, so Eduardo had to be kicked out first. First of all, Sean used the example of the founder of Victoria's Secret, who sold his shares at a low price and eventually committed suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. It would also remind Mark not to repeat the same mistake. Then Sean said that you and I are the same kind of people who can become big figures who stir up the world. And Eduardo is at most a wage earner of capital, and we are the ones who can change the situation and truly create value. Although Mark still trusted and relied on Eduardo at this time, when Sean promised to help him promote Facebook to the whole of Europe, he decided to pull Sean in without telling Eduardo, and the result did not disappoint him, and soon Facebook became popular throughout Europe. At the same time, the twin brothers, who had not heard the news, were attending the Royal Tour weekly in the UK. Although they tried their best during the competition, They still finished second by half a second. At the cocktail party after the game, the two were dejected, but soon they persuaded themselves to cheer up. However, at this time, they learned that Facebook had already gone beyond the United States and entered the world, which made the brothers, who were already angry, even more annoyed. They immediately threw the word gentleman behind their heads, not only swore, but also decided to sue Mark immediately. Soon the two sides confronted each other in court, but faced with the accusation that the twins stole ideas. Mark completely disagreed and even said publicly that Facebook was completely different from their pimping idea. Mark said that everything his team is doing now, you brothers can't do it even if you rack your brains. In addition, when asked why he initially asked Eduardo for investment instead of the wealthy twin brothers, Mark said that because Eduardo is the chairman of the Harvard Investment Association and a close friend I trust, I just want to cooperate with him. However, the other party's lawyer said that the good brother you mentioned is now claiming $6 million from you. It turned out that since Facebook became popular in Europe, Mark began to program day and night. As a result, he completely forgot that Eduardo was coming to California. Eduardo could only run to the company in the heavy rain, which made him very unhappy. Unexpectedly, the first thing he saw when he opened the door was Sean, whom he disliked the most, and a room full of underage girls playing crazy. Not only that, with Mark's introduction, Eduardo learned that Sean had not only become a member of the company, Sean also almost completely replaced Eduardo's position. What's more infuriating is that when he was looking for advertisers in vain, Sean actually arranged a meeting between Mark and the bigwigs in the investment community. Eduardo hoped that Mark would stand on his side, but Mark not only denied his value and contribution to the company, but also emphasized the importance of Sean. This made Eduardo extremely angry, and made him make a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. In a rage, he froze all the company's accounts and returned to New York without stopping. However, he had an argument with his girlfriend as soon as he got home. There were already problems in their relationship before, but Eduardo has always been the weaker party. Even though he couldn't stand his girlfriend's control, he didn't dare to take the initiative to break up. This time, facing his girlfriend's aggressiveness, he also took the initiative to make peace with the scarf he bought in advance. But his girlfriend had never worn a scarf before, and the reason she was angry this time was because Eduardo's relationship status on Facebook was single. However, as a co-founder, Eduardo didn't know how to change that status. Just then, Eduardo's phone rang suddenly. His girlfriend thought it was his lover in California, but it turned out to be Mark calling. Eduardo should have been very afraid of Mark's call, but at this time he ran to the bathroom to answer it as if he saw a savior. It turned out that Mark found that his bank card was frozen. He scolded Eduardo on the phone for not doing this, and even accused him of being naive for his revenge. Because no matter how big the internal differences of opinion are, you should not do anything that hurts the company. Once the capital chain is broken, the server will be shut down, and even if the server is shut down for one day, it may trigger a domino effect. At first, Eduardo wanted to use this method to destroy Facebook, a platform based on user relationships, to prove his importance in the company, but now he realizes the seriousness of the problem. Fortunately, it was discovered in time, and no disaster occurred. Mark was willing to let go of the past and let the matter go. Then Mark announced another great news. The investment boss he had met before was very optimistic about the development prospects of Facebook. The boss decided to invest $500,000 and a proper office, but the company had to be reorganized due to the entry of new capital. Mark asked Eduardo to fly to Los Angeles to sign several extremely important documents. The sudden surprise made Eduardo very excited. This also seemed to give him confidence and courage, allowing him to stand up straight and break up with his girlfriend. After that, Eduardo took the nearest flight overnight and came to the new office in San Francisco. At this time, two lawyers had been waiting for a long time. They showed Eduardo 4 agreements, but Eduardo did not look at them carefully and just asked about the equity ratio. When he learned that Mark's shares accounted for 51%, his shares accounted for 34%, and Sean's shares accounted for only 6.47%. Eduardo was very satisfied with this allocation, so as a top student in Harvard's economics department, he signed the agreement without even reading the content. Little did he know that his best friend Mark took this opportunity to set him up. A few months later, Facebook's users were about to exceed 1 million, and Mark planned to hold a celebration party in the company, and specifically notified Eduardo that he must come to attend. Not only did Eduardo show up as scheduled that day, he also dressed up well. But he didn't know that what was waiting for him was an ambush. It turned out that in the past few months, Mark quietly issued more than 20 million shares. In the equity structure he designed, the shareholding ratio of all other people remained unchanged. Only Eduardo's equity was diluted from 34% to less than 1%. Not only that, he was also removed from Facebook, and his name was no longer in the co-founder column. Because in the previous fourth agreement, he voluntarily signed to give up his shareholder voting rights. When he was not present, he fully authorized Mark to handle it. At this time, Eduardo finally realized that he was betrayed by his best friend. His once close friend had become his enemy in court. Eduardo wanted to know when Mark had the idea of kicking him out of the company. Mark did not answer this question. Eduardo originally guessed that it was when the funds were frozen, but he changed his mind and thought that it might be earlier, as early as when Facebook was just born. Because at that time, Eduardo successfully joined the Phoenix Society through layers of tests, while Mark wanted to join but was not qualified in the end. This made Mark jealous, but at that time he needed the Phoenix Society's connections to promote Facebook. So after using Eduardo, he had to write him into the co-founder column. But after meeting Sean later, the differences between the two became greater. Mark was suddenly and inexplicably accused of animal abuse by the school newspaper. As one of the co-founders of Facebook, this is undoubtedly very unfavorable to the development of Facebook. Later, Mark also used this incident to fight back against Eduardo's accusation, accusing him of damaging the company's image and interests. However, in fact, it was just a misunderstanding. Eduardo had just joined the Order of the Phoenix, and as part of the initiation ceremony, he had to carry a chick with him. As a result, the school cafeteria happened to serve chicken that day, and he had to feed the chick, so he had to feed the chick chicken. As a result, he was sued by someone for forcing the chick to eat its own kind. Although the matter was finally settled, Mark also said calmly that he didn't care. But Eduardo only realized at this time that maybe he was framed by Mark that time. But there was no evidence for all this. And Eduardo is out now, and it's useless to care about these. In this long-planned capital trap, some people lost everything, and some succeeded. However, although Sean got what he wanted, he didn't seem to be particularly satisfied. So Sean humiliated his defeated opponent in public again and took out the $19,000 check that Eduardo had originally invested, and ridiculed him that it was a pity that he couldn't exchange it because the account had been frozen by you. Although Mark did not express his opinion in this conflict, after Eduardo left, he suddenly accused Sean of being too extreme, and this was the first time the two had a quarrel. At this time, Facebook's users officially exceeded 1 million. It was less than a year since it went online, and everyone in the company was cheering. Only Mark looked a little lonely. This was obviously the glorious moment he had dreamed of, but now he could not find anyone to share his joy with. After the official celebration, Sean organized a second party, but Mark did not go and stayed alone in the company. Fortunately, he did not attend the party, because he soon learned from Sean, because they took illegal drugs at the party, and many minors were involved. After being discovered by the police, they were all taken to the police station. Sean suspected that this was Eduardo's revenge. Otherwise, how could he encounter a police inspection by chance? But Mark said categorically that it was absolutely impossible, and then he said that now was not the time to dwell on this. After all, the fact that executives encouraged minors to get involved in illegal drugs would soon spread throughout the entire network, and the negative impact on the company would be immeasurable. Mark said that he needed to find a solution quickly, but before Mark could come up with a solution, Mark was involved in 2 lawsuits against the twins and Eduardo in succession, even though he and his lawyer had negotiated with the other party before. Even the 3 parties confronted each other together, but there was still no result after a whole day. Mark's lawyer told him that if he did not reconcile, the next step would be to go through the legal process. And in view of all the evidence and Mark's actions, the jury might not have a good impression of Mark. This means that Mark is very likely to lose the case, so settlement and compensation is the wisest choice at the moment. Anyway, Mark is now a 100 billionaire, and the compensation amount is nothing more than a trivial amount for him. After thinking for a while, Mark decided to accept this outcome. Then Mark told the lawyer that I am not a bad person, and the lawyer replied meaningfully that you are not a jerk yet, but you are committed to becoming one. In the end, Mark reached a settlement with $65 million, and Eduardo's name was rewritten into the issuer column as one of the founders. After the lawyer left, Mark found his ex-girlfriend on Facebook, and then applied to add her as a friend, and then sat in front of the computer and kept refreshing to see if it was approved. One of the motivations for founding Facebook in the first place was to prove his ability to his ex-girlfriend. But now he has become the world's top young rich man, but he can't get a glance back from his first love, he also lost the only friend who really treated him. The Social Network is a biographical film directed by David Fincher, starring Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield, released in 2010. But it is not an orthodox biographical film, but adapted from a novel, and most of the plots are fictional. Director David Fincher once admitted that this is a biographical film mixed with fiction and fact. In addition, there is an unwritten rule in Hollywood that if the protagonist of a biographical theme is still alive, the script must at least be given to the original owner for review. But when this film was filmed, Zuckerberg himself did not agree. After the film was released, Zuckerberg said that the plot in it was indeed different from reality. After all, no one would be stupid enough to write formulas on glass. However, Zuckerberg did not control the film company because of this, perhaps because rather than saying that this movie is a personal biography, it is better to say that it is a story that includes friendship, betrayal, jealousy, and fits the chapter of the times. Well, today's movie sharing is here. Welcome to like, comment, and forward. Thank you for your patience. Looking forward to meeting you next time.